Austin 316 says I just whipped your ass.
I wish I was special.
Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels loathe one another.
So fucking special.
Put the letter S in front of Hitman, you've had my exact opinion of Bret Hart. I am gonna tear you to pieces.
You're a disgrace to wrestling.
But I'm afraid.
And can't nobody stop me.
I'm going to take you through a story of 3 key players in the world of professional wrestling and how their stories are forever linked, starting with Stone Cold Steve Austin in WCW. So here was the big issue in 1995. We had main event players, many of whom were with WWF prior to making the jump in 1995. 1995 was a key year in which Turner decided, we're going to take WCW seriously. We're going to get big names. We're going to get Hulk Hogan. We're going to get the Macho Man, Randy Savage. And Ric Flair was able to maintain his status in the main event. Big Van Vader was another kind of addition, one of more of a organic addition to the roster as opposed to just cherry picking top stars who had kind of aged out, for other words. I mean, WWF kind of let Hogan and Macho Man go. Macho Man was an announcer with the WWF, and that's why he went to WCW. And he goes to WCW, becomes an instant player there in the main event picture. What this does, though, is it does push a name like Sting down to only the upper mid card, and quite frankly, I think that is insane. We do know what Sting would go on to do once he turns into Crow Sting, and yes, he was in some main events even in 1995, which is the year that we're discussing. But he was definitely pushed down to not be a consistent main event player because of the likes of, obviously, Hogan and Macho Man. Dungeon of Doom was, they had some steam. They were feuding with Hogan, so they were getting a lot of main event kind of matches from that. Then you got the mid-card. You got characters like the Harlem Heat. We are all familiar with Booker T. He went on to become sort of a superstar, King Booker in the WWF, but also a five-time WCW heavyweight champion later on. Diamond Dallas Page was a burgeoning star in the mid-card, and then you even have guys like the Renegade, a pure and simple Ultimate Warrior ripoff. And even though, like the Dungeon of Doom, they would go on to have characters like the Giant. They had the experience of Kevin Sullivan. Then you have the Shark, who was in the early 90s. He was someone who would feud with Hogan. So, he had some cachet. This was all pushing Steve Austin out. He had won the U.S. title in 95, but then when they were doing shows in Japan, there was a NJPW and WCW kind of agreement. They would share workers, they would do shows overseas, and he was working in Japan, tore his tricep off the bone, and Eric Bischoff called him and let him go because, like I said, they got all these burgeoning stars. They feel like he was unmarketable, in Eric Bischoff's words. They got Sting, who's getting pushed down to the upper mid card. And look, revisionist history is really easy, but he was a tremendous worker. That was something Vince saw in him. Jim Ross saw the talent everywhere. Paul Heyman saw the talent everywhere. And Ross and Heyman were the guys who worked very, very closely with him because they were both either manager in Paul Heyman's case or, talent and also announcer in Jim Ross's case. They had a good up close look at them. They are both considered some of the best talent kind of scouts within pro wrestling, and they knew Steve Austin has the athleticism. He does have the look, even though he was starting to bald a bit, but he takes care of that pretty well, I will say, once he finds his look. But he was the total package, and I just think people didn't want to invest in let's make him him. They just wanted someone like Hogan who was already prepackaged. They don't need to figure anything out. They got the name. They'll draw the fans in. Austin could do it all. Okay, and it's easy for me to say that looking back, but putting the U.S. title on him was correct. And then, I mean, just to, as soon as he gets injured, they get rid of him. Well, guess what? That sends him to ECW with Paul Heyman, who I mentioned earlier.
Well, all that never happened.
He was Paul E. Dangerously in WCW, but he went on to be the owner, mastermind, and genius behind what was Eastern Championship Wrestling and then became Extreme Championship Wrestling. And Austin was cutting these insane, intense, amazing promos while he was healing, and then he would go on to do some in-ring work. Jim Ross said that the WWF, that is, was basically subsidizing ECW so that they could use them like a AAA team is used in Major League Baseball. So WWF was just constantly keeping an eye on them and seeing, can we kind of pull any of these guys up the ranks and use them? And after his promos, I think Jim Ross was thinking, look, I knew this guy was great. I had seen him in the Hollywood Blondes. He has a great heel persona. We know he can talk from WCW, but he's doing something with an even harder edge than anything we have seen in a great long while, and made Vince McMahon pull the trigger. But Vince McMahon doesn't have all the information that Jim Ross has, nor that Paul Heyman has, so he gives him the great gimmick of the Ringmaster in January of 1996, and this was destined to failure. Steve Austin knew it. He was hooked up with Ted DiBiase, who is one of those prolific wrestlers from the territory era, and yeah, he even makes it work when he kind of gets this polished, curated character in the cartoonish world of the late 80s WWF. So he has the $1 Million Championship. The whole gimmick is that he is this in-ring technician who can do it all. He is great in the ring, especially before he's injured, which is something we're going to touch upon later. But he has so much more to offer, and he just proved it in ECW, and now it's like that corporate structure is putting a stranglehold on Steve Austin. And he said after about 6 months that the Vince is kind of like, look, he wants to change his gimmick. I don't care. Let him do it. This Ringmaster gimmick is not doing anything for us. And, you know, it's better to at least try something before he just basically washes out of here. Meanwhile, we have heading into WrestleMania in 1996, March, we have Bret the Hitman Hart is going to face off against Royal Rumble winner Shawn Michaels. And for this stage of the game, this is about as big a matchup for the fans of this era. So I think a lot of people would look at Savage Steamboat to be like the preeminent battle of the technicians that ever happened in WWF on a big stage. And it's ironic, I mean, the biggest match also happened in WrestleMania 3 where Andre took on Hogan. But for people who were kind of kids or grew up on the new era where they had gotten rid of that batch, basically, like I said, Hogan's gone, Macho's gone. A lot of those people who really laid the foundation for the WWF are gone, and we got the young stars from that time are now picking up that flag and being the flag bearer of the WWF. Bret Hitman Hart was a 3-time WWF heavyweight champion going into this Iron Man match. He was a one-time Intercontinental Champion, two-time Tag Champion, one-time King of the Ring, and one-time Royal Rumble winner. If you remember, that's when he tied Lex Luger. They both fell over the rope at the same time. Then you got HBK, three-time Intercontinental Champion, two-time Tag Team Champion, and two-time Royal Rumble winner. Look, clearly these guys were the biggest stars. You know, you got Taker, you got Diesel, you got Ramon, who were kind of on the way out at this time period. But you don't have guys who really have this big a track records. And they had came out of the tag team scene. They had established themselves as singles stars, which is clear by their Intercontinental Championship reigns. And then obviously Bret had been champion in 92 and then against Ric Flair, and then twice thereafter, including this current reign that took him into this Iron Man match. And then magic was made. This is one of, I believe it's the only Iron Man match. I have to be honest, I haven't kept up with it to the extent that I used to back in the day. The only Iron Man match at WrestleMania, I believe, although since they've made it a 2-day affair, I haven't been able to fully, watch every single match. However, a lot of people tell you, Bret the Hitman Hart is one of the best in-ring technicians of all time. He's my favorite. I wouldn't argue you there. But Shawn Michaels is definitely in that discussion. The way I see it, it's Bret, it's Flair, it's Michaels. But Michaels has so much flair because of his extreme athleticism. And it is really a clinic on professional wrestling when these two met. And it went into overtime. So it was tied at overtime. Bret walks away, considers it a title retention because generally, if the champion is disqualified or counted out, he gets to retain the title. You got to either pin him or submit him. But no, the president at the time, Gorilla Monsoon, comes back out, says, look, it's going into OT, and Shawn Michaels puts it away and defeats Bret the Hitman Hart for his first heavyweight championship reign, which I think, Michaels is a guy where you absolutely have to give him the strap at some point in time. He was that damn good. He was a tremendous character. He was dynamite in the ring, and he did have a lot of fans who were crazy about him. Now, did these guys draw? It was rough going for both of them, I will have to admit, and it was probably rougher on paper for Shawn Michaels. Now, was that just signs of the time and the product that they were putting out? That's something that we're going to discuss because Austin clearly influences a huge evolution in this. And look, quite frankly, Michaels and Bret Hart were people that you can clearly see that change go through as well. So then we go from March of 1996 to June of 1996. King of the Ring, Stone Cold Steve Austin wins King of the Ring. He had gotten busted open in one of the previous matches before the final and then faced Jake the Snake Roberts, who was kind of this religious character because everyone had known him as this devious heel during his prime run in the late 80s and early 90s. Now he's come back and, he's a born-again Christian, and Austin, the heel, beats him and then says the classic lines,
Austin 316 says I just whipped your ass.
You can talk about your John 3:16. Austin 3:16 says, I just whooped your ass. And that's the bottom line because Stone Cold said so. I mean, these are iconic lines and quite frankly are pivotal moments for the Attitude Era. I think a lot of people, including Vince McMahon, said because he has a man crush on Shawn Michaels, who I have no issue with. He was someone who brought about the Attitude Era, but I think those lines being delivered off the top of the dome from Steve Austin are words that changed the course of history. Meanwhile, or I guess rather before this, something that had really put this history on this timeline was the fact that those people that I said, Razor, Diesel, they go to WCW. They finally get their young stars, which end up making a huge difference over there. They do the curtain call with Shawn, with Paul Levesque, Triple H, who is now, the head of the whole WWF in terms of creative. And Shawn was the guy, so they can't punish him. So Triple H, who was going to win King of the Ring, is punished. He doesn't get to win it anymore. That puts Austin to have one of his big moments in the WWF. It kind of solidifies him and gives him some credibility. Then he gets further credibility in 1996 of the November of that year when he takes on Bret the Hitman Hart at Survivor Series. This is a tremendous match. No, he does not win. Bret takes the victory here, but we see this feud. It's a tremendous feud, one that I'm a huge fan of. I always thought that they worked magic together. But Austin has acknowledged that this was huge for kind of putting him on the map as like this credible heel because he got to share the ring with Bret the Hitman Hart. And that's always going to make someone look absolutely amazing. February of 1997, Shawn loses his smile. It was a knee injury that made him drop the title. So early 97, Shawn is now out of the title picture. They did a fatal four-way to determine who was going to be the champion moving out of that. Then we're brought to March 1997, WrestleMania 13, where Bret has a submission match with Steve Austin. And this is a match that was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, one of the greatest WWF matches ever, and definitely one of the best WrestleMania matches ever. We have a double turn here. Bret turns heel, Austin turns face, and he doesn't quit when put into the sharpshooter. He bleeds out and staggers back to the locker room thereafter, never giving up. This is a match that further solidifies the history of the WWF. It puts Hitman on the way out of this promotion and puts a rocket on Steve Austin's ass as he is set up to take the place as one of the best faces in the company. Then we have Austin actually pick up a victory in April of 1997 over Bret the Hitman Hart at an In Your House. It was by disqualification, but we're starting to see like, hey, now he's finally picking up a victory, even though he had lost to Hitman twice prior to this. He has an Intercontinental title reign that is very short-lived because in August of 97, Owen Hart, brother of Bret Hart, has a match with him. This is one that fans would have absolutely gone gaga over, wanting to see, because Owen was tremendous in the ring in his own right, a great heel, and Austin obviously is this fresh new face that is completely different than what we had seen. Well, guess what? A sit-out pile driver takes Steve Austin off the roster while he recovers from a broken neck. Spinal stenosis has been a problem with him. I mean, he was severely concussed following this match, could barely roll up Owen Hart because he had suffered paralysis in the ring. One of the scariest moments that someone can really face with any sport that has that type of physicality. I mean, facing paralysis is the scariest thing kind of imaginable. but he was definitely being set up. He was going to have the title falling out of SummerSlam, but rather there is a falling out in that he was injured. Meanwhile, at this very same pay-per-view, Shawn Michaels is a special referee for Bret the Hitman Hart and Undertaker, another main event star for the WWF in the late 1990s. And Shawn is suckered into engaging with Bret the Hitman Hart, ends up hitting Undertaker with a chair, which gives Bret his 5th WWF Heavyweight Championship reign. We're coming out of August, and by October, we have a feud with Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker. They have a very famous first Hell in a Cell match at In Your House Bad Blood. This is another just banger of a match. I definitely recommend you guys checking out that. Clearly the Bret Hitman Hart versus Austin WrestleMania match, then the Survivor Series Hart versus Austin match, and that Iron Man match where Bret Hitman Hart takes on Shawn Michaels. But this was super cool. You know, great spots from Shawn coming off the cage, and he's able to beat The Undertaker because Kane is introduced to the WWF fandom. Then, very shortly after, just 1 month after, we have Survivor Series in November of 1997. It takes place in Montreal, Canada, which is home turf for Bret the Hitman Hart, and we're finally getting a rematch between HBK and the Hitman. It was a long-awaited match that people have been clamoring for since that Iron Man match. Mind you, negotiations between Bret and Vince had taken place. He was given a 20-year deal, as Vince was kind of scared that WCW was just going to take another one of his prime stars following Diesel and Razor going over there. Then we have WrestleMania 13 happen, and things kind of changed in the mind of Vince McMahon. He no longer wanted to honor a 20-year deal with the Hitman, and he encouraged Bret to take a deal with Eric Bischoff. Famously, this is covered in Wrestling with Shadows, one of the best wrestling documentaries that has ever been made. And we get to see what happens on the day of the Montreal Screwjob, and that is what happened at Survivor Series. As Bret said, he didn't want to drop it to Shawn Michaels in that main event. Vince told him that is fine because contractually Bret had creative control, which means in the last 30 days of his contract, every creative decision that is about his character has to be okayed by him. He said, I'll drop it to Ken Shamrock. A great option would have been drop it to Shawn Michaels, or to Steve Austin, rather. But there was no searching to see, what one of those options should we go with. He just told him, yeah, you don't have to drop it to him. And then Shawn locks in Bret's famous sharpshooter on Bret, and the bell is rung as Vince is out there. Vince is spat on camera. Bret destroys a ton of television equipment. Shawn gets out of there like a bat out of hell. Then Bret, he spells out infamously WCW on the camera, goes backstage, knocks out Vince McMahon, and Bret is out of the WWF, and HBK is the champ. Shortly following that November match on Survivor Series, the Montreal Screwjob, we head into early 1998, in fact, January of 1998. Steve Austin wins the Royal Rumble. He had, the signs were all there. He was mega hot. He was one of the hottest faces on the roster. Everybody knew. And we had this burgeoning Mr. McMahon character that had taken face when Bret was out. Austin was this anti-authority figure. All of this was going to be set up perfectly. Did they know? I'm not sure. I'm not sure if they were already realizing that hey, look, we could run this feud, once Austin's the main guy. But look, they knew one thing, and it was that all signs pointed to Austin. Austin was a draw. Shawn was just a great person to have be the baton bearer, or rather baton passer, someone to give him that match, and he was a tremendous in-ring performer. But we got to put a bow on that Taker feud. They had started something at the I believe SummerSlam of '97. They have this Hell in a Cell, which Kane became a big part of, and they have a casket match at the Royal Rumble. Shawn retains here, but he ends up really messing up his back. I think I saw footage of it, and he goes over the top rope, and it looks like he hits the bottom, his lower back on the edge of the casket, which ends up really, he's able to stay in the saddle, for lack of a better term. He was able to work through the back pain, but it made his reliance on painkillers probably worse than they already were. He was trying to work through the pain, and he was definitely limited in terms of what he could do in the ring. Now, let's not kid ourselves. A limited HBK is still a better wrestler than 90% of all wrestlers to ever do it, but he was not, at that time, able to put on quite the same matches that he would normally. Meanwhile, the Attitude Era is in full swing. I mean, Austin is obviously a huge proponent of that, or maybe one of the key figures in it, but D-Generation X was also integral and one of the faces that are often associated with the Attitude Era. So we have Shawn retains at the Rumble, and Austin wins the Rumble, which means they are on a collision course to face off come WrestleMania 14, which happens in March of 1998. And what really changed up the ball game was the fact that Mike Tyson, out of prison, is able to be procured by the WWF to be a special enforcer of this match. Austin is being skyrocketed to essentially be a cultural figure. I mean, he's someone whose name is being recognized up there with like Bart Simpson and Eric Cartman. I mean, he is culturally relevant in a way that even the greats like HBK just quite weren't yet. He's popular. He's selling merchandise out the yin-yang. Austin 316 is thriving like it never had before. And it's funny, we're talking about Hogan, we're talking about Macho Man. Hogan, he did have sustained relevance where, from 85 to maybe even 91, I mean, he was, let's say 87 to 91, a 4-year stretch there. He was just electric, and his highs were supremely high. Now, Austin, I think his spike is just a little bit higher than Hogan's, but maybe just a little bit shorter because, Owen breaking his neck, I think, severely limited him. And he's on the come up in 98, and then kind of by 2001, it's just not quite the same. I think he kind of had like a 2-year period where he was just nuclear hot. I mean, he was white hot. He was scorching hot like the sun. I mean, this guy was, I don't know if anyone was as beloved as Austin. And then, come 2002, even maybe a little bit 2001, he wasn't quite working in the ring the same way. And, maybe some of that's creative, but, he couldn't do the same things. And I think it taken a major toll on his health, the schedule, this and that. But a large part, I think, of his cultural relevance and really catapulting him and the WWF to the new level was Mike Tyson's involvement in this WrestleMania 14 main event. It's a match that I think Michaels and Austin would have liked to do again had HBK been 100% healthy, but it did exactly what it needed to do in terms of this, like showing the WWF world, the WWF universe, that Austin is now officially the guy. So kind of the way that Bret had passed that baton to Michaels had done to Austin, and then Michaels was out of the WWF. He didn't wrestle for I want to say about 4-ish years because of that back injury. Austin is off and running now with the title, and then what had been established with Mr. McMahon screwing Bret now takes a completely new evolved role, with Austin now being the mega white hot face of the WWF, kind of getting the rub by Mike Tyson. Austin becomes this just completely like a name that is as recognizable as the Popes. I think we all know Steve Austin today, and the history of WWF is forever changed with this match. I hope you all enjoyed this little story, something that I found to be, this shaped my childhood, and I think it's just proof of how good the storytelling is, and how all these little quirks and these hitches, these lefts when they were supposed to go right, it changed the face of pro wrestling. And I'm a huge fan of it as a form of entertainment. I love movies, you guys know that, but I think pro wrestling will forever be my first love. So let me know your thoughts down below. I want to do more stories like this, especially if you guys enjoy them. So be sure to like and subscribe to show your support, and hopefully we'll do another one of these again. So thank you again, and I will catch you on the Flippity Floop. Bye, y'all.